All right, I'm caught up. So with Floofy, yeah, Floofy's still there. Awesome. So Floofy, you wanted to, what exactly? Let's take a look at Floofy's project here. And while we're at it, earlier in the stream, I was showing you workspaces. Let's go to my animation workspace because we're going to be talking about animation. So you have, oh, I see it. Okay, so you have a 16 framed animation, and that's what it is. So explain to me what you are hoping to do. So you probably created this with radial gradients, it looks like. So, all right, so this is just a bitmap on the bottom layer. Or is the whole thing, oh, this is a bitmap. Oh, I see, you imported a bitmap sequence, a sequence of images. Ah, okay. All right. Gotcha. I think it's going too fast, like it is sped up. I just wanted it to slow down. All right, so let's do this. First of all, before I edit this little timeline here, let's just duplicate these frames. I'm going to show you that, okay? Let's extend out basis. Let's go to, I don't know, extend it out to here. So I'm going to click on the timeline down here a little bit, right? And I'm going to hit F5. F5 is insert frames. If you don't want to use keyboard shortcuts, I think you go to Insert, Timeline, and then here it is, Frame. Boom. And now I've extended, let's say, the exposure or the length of that bottom layer, which ultimately extends the time I have on the main timeline. So my animation went from 16 frames to now 33, okay? But because the top layer with the bitmap sequence in the animation stops, right? Now these are all empty. Right, it's just that all we're seeing for the latter half of the animation is that bottom layer. I want to duplicate all these up here. So what I'm going to do is this. Select them. Literally click and drag across, and it creates this highlight. In fact, while I'm here, so you guys can see it better, right? Because it's my timeline's, I'll admit, it's a little bit small. I'm going to go to this drop-down menu. Oh, and you can't see it. Hold on. Let me, because it's showing up outside of Animate. So here, you're going to see a little bit of my desktop. If I go here, there it is. That's what you couldn't see before. So I'm going to go to, I don't know, large. So right now, by default, oh, you know what? I lost music, didn't I? Let's get our music back. Oh, I don't like it without music. It kind of made me sad. Like, where's my music? All right, so let's go back here. By default, it's normal, right? That's what we're looking at here. I can go to tiny, small, whatever. Let's go to large. And so now everything's a little bit larger, okay? And since I'm dealing with the relatively short timeline, I'm not worried about having to scroll the timeline endlessly. All right, so now it's easier for you guys to see it. I'm going to select, click and drag, and select all of these. I'm going to hold down Alt. And anywhere in the highlighted area while holding down the Alt key, I'm going to click and drag to the right. And that duplicated those layers. So now it's repeating itself. Okay. So now I want to play with the timing. So here's the... I'm going to make this a blank keyframe. All right. So here's where it starts again. Here. All right. So let's do this. Let's click on a frame. F5, again, as I showed you, is Insert, Timeline, Frame. I'm just going to hit F5. I hit F5, and it inserted a frame in here, a blank frame, because I was actually clicked on a blank frame, a blank keyframe. So it inserted a blank frame for me, and it pushed all these down. So we have one extra frame here. I'm going to click on this frame here, all right? I'm going to hit F5 again. So watch what happens to the right of it. It inserts another frame, which makes this frame stay for one extra frame. If I keep on doing that, repeat this. F5, F5, F5. What I'm doing is creating an animation that is on every other frame now. The keyframes, which are identified by the frames that have the little black dot, okay? Those are keyframes. That's a frame that has content on it that has changed. So now if I play this back, it's a little bit slower. So let's compare that to this and that. So it's a little bit slower, not a ton slower. You know, I'm even thinking we don't even need the, since this is an image sequence up on top, we don't even need the bottom layer, right? If I turn off these layers and just turn on the top layer, oh, I see, you have a blank layer, sorry, a blank keyframe here. So we do want it. All right, so we have two different speeds happening. Let me make that a little bit bigger, sorry. Let's go, I'm using control and the number 2. That'll fill the screen as much as possible based on what is visible in the UI. So we have this. Let's extend this out a little bit. I'm going to hit F5 here. Let's do it. Let's do it a couple different ways. Let's try Alt again and see if I am not a liar. Do that. All right. Let me insert that. So now, actually, let's insert a little bit more. Hit F5, insert that a little bit more. So now what I want to do is repeat the same thing. Hit F5, hit F5, click and select, hit F5. I'm just inserting frames to create now an animation that takes place on the 3s, every 3rd frame. Every keyframe is on every 3rd frame. So now it's going to be a lot slower. Maybe it's something with this document. So now you can see how much slower that is. What is your frame rate set to? Let me check that out. Yeah, you're at 24. Okay. All right, so now we have, you can see how I've spaced these apart. I basically kind of accordioned them. So here's the original, and then it's going to go to every other frame, which is essentially cutting the frame rate in half, but doing it on the timeline. So now this is at 12 frames per second, and now this is cutting or dividing the frame rate into thirds. So it's around 7 point something. No, it's 8. Sorry, duh. It's 8 frames per second. So this is 24 frames per second, and then we go to 12, and then we go to 8. Okay. So there. That is how I would slow this down. Now let's say I want to show you guys some other possible way to actually produce this animation somehow, right? Using all vector. Let's say you wanted to do that. I made the base thingy longer. Yeah, and all I did was insert frames just to sort of extend the exposure. I didn't create any keyframes because it's unnecessary, because it's just there. It's just sitting there. It's not meant to be keyframed or animate, right? You need to highlight the same amount of frames and then copy. Oh, come on, really? Not on a Mac? That's crazy. Well, you shouldn't. And historically you never have, but that should never be an issue. So I'll show you why. Copy frames and then right click somewhere else, paste frames. There it is. And it's just and it works. I don't know why it wouldn't work before. I got to find out why. There's definitely a bug on Windows. I've never experienced it on my Mac. Or it's some weird thing with this flaw. Who knows? Who knows why? All right, so but to your point, who was it that said it? Ite Zizo. Okay. The reason why that is true, all right, so what it doesn't do, right, so your thinking is that you can't paste multiple frames in one frame. True, you can't. What it will do, though, is if I do just select one frame, right, I say paste frames, it will extend it out starting from that frame. So the issue is, though, to your point, that if I wanted to insert this animation or what I have copied to my clipboard in here, and I just select one frame and say paste frames, it messes up. I don't think it pushes out. Yeah, what it does is it pushes it out. It does everything out. But if you have other layers with animations, it throws off all the timing relative to anything else you might have happening on other layers. So what you want to do is, and I wish Animate had this, I would love to be able to click and drag and then see the number of frames selected counted somewhere, right? So I don't have to, but otherwise, since we don't have that, this is what I have to do. Let's say I want to do, I want to be able to paste these frames in and have all the other layers push out the same number of frames, right? So everything else is in sync after the fact, whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Actually, so I don't bore the crap out of you guys, let's do this. 1, 2, well, we know starting from 1, we're going to do 16 frames, okay? I'm going to copy this frame, and let's go down here. What I want to do is this. Let's insert 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. We know we have enough frames. Maybe throw in a few more, right? But if I want to paste what I have, those 16 frames that I have copied into memory, into my clipboard, if I paste them in now, right? Let's say this animation has to start here on frame 130. If I just select one frame and say, oh, paste frames is not selected. I'm losing my mind here. This is like the most convoluted thing ever. Copy frames. Paste frames is not... Am I not really copying them? Let's do Control-Alt-C, which is the shortcut. Yeah, it's weird. Something is definitely weird. Let's try this. Copy frames. Yeah, no, it's just grayed out. All right, so what I would have to do, let's just say these are copied into memory, right? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, and there's 16 of them, I would go 1, if I had to start here, to avoid pushing these down the timeline and throwing my, my syncing off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now I have the same number of frames highlighted that I have copied into my clipboard. I right-click over it and say paste frames. It would, in theory, paste it all inside of there and not push the timeline down any further. So that's all that is. All right, sorry. That shiny thing that goes around to like go around and explode in that supernova. That shiny thing. Are you talking about like this as a path? Like it comes and goes like this? Like a comet? Let me know. Best English I can. Like that. The animation is like that exactly. Alright, so you want something like this going on. Alright, so now because this is a sequence of bitmaps, you can't edit bitmaps, right? So let's do this. This is a good example. So what I want to do is have some sort of comet that looks like this a little bit, that travels around and then psh. So let's do this. Let's clear all of this. All right, so we're going to have a comet go from, I don't know, roughly frame 5, let's say, and then travel in this direction and then explode there. How would we do that? And by the way, what version? Well, we won't worry about that. You can worry about that. So I need this comet to be some sort of individual object, but first I want to recreate it. So let's grab these colors, and I'm going to show you guys how to create gradients and radial gradients and create stuff like that. So let's go to animation workspace. Let's actually go to design. There's designer, but I created my own. So let's do this. All right, let's do that. Cool. All right, so mixing colors. We've seen the color panel, right? How much time do I have? It's 2. I got an hour. Good. 2. Let's go to Radial Gradient. All right, we'll get into some real quick, maybe the last half hour or so, or right after this, we'll get into more animation stuff and character-based stuff. I'm still working on my coffee. All right, we want to create a radial gradient to sort of simulate this, or to simulate this comet. Okay, so here's the fill color. We selected radial gradient from here. You can select none, but that's not useful. Solid color, linear gradient, creates this kind of a gradient. Again, it would be great if these were bigger, but they aren't. Radial gradient, and we know the center is going to be kind of whitish blue. Okay, so I can actually click this little tab down here, double click it, right, and it brings up my swatches panel. But if I hover anywhere outside of it, it turns into an eyedropper, and I can grab the screen anywhere. Anything that's on my screen, it will pick up that color. So let's just grab in here, like maybe it's white, maybe it's just pure white, but I definitely see the second color, the outside color, as being more bluish, something like this. But right now, both these colors are opaque. And what's going to happen is if I create a new layer, and I create, let's turn off strokes, and I create, a circle, it's going to look like that. And that doesn't look like that. So let's go back to our radial gradient. Let's select this swatch, which it is. And if we actually, this is the alpha hot text slider down here, represented by the letter A. Now if I create, if I create that circle with that radial gradient as my fill, then now I have this. Now it's pretty good. It doesn't have the nice coloring that you have in here. If we want to get that kind of close, I can now in here, while this is still selected, let's just actually select it. I think I had object drawing mode on. Hold on. Did I? No, I didn't. This is an actual... Oh, you know what I had was it was oval primitive tool, but that's fine. I'm actually going to hit Control B and break it apart. Okay, so it's just, this is the actual vector art here. Let me just lock that layer. All right, so let's open this up again. With it selected, actually better yet, I'm going to hit F, which is this tool here. I never even told you about this tool. This is the Gradient Transform tool. I'm going to select this tool. This does a bunch of different things, but right now it's selected, which means I can alter this like on the fly and see it get updated. I'm literally just moving these colors around in this slider, right? I can, if I bring the opaque white that's the center all the way up, it creates that effect, which we don't want. Let's leave it back where it is. But if I wanted to, let's say, update the color of this and make it a little bit more blue, I can. You can see it sort of change. But let's say I want to add another color in here. I can click and add another swatch. I think you can add up to 8 or 16. I don't even know. It used to be limited, but it might not be anymore. And so let's alter the amount of alpha this particular middle swatch or third swatch has. And we can even change the color a little bit to make it a little bit more in tune with your colors. Just sort of mixing as I go. Maybe want that a little bit lighter. But you get the idea. I'm just mixing colors and seeing it in real time, getting a feel for it. I don't know, maybe more like closer to 30 works. All right, that's probably fine for now. What this gradient, the gradient, this tool here, what this does though too, the gradient transform tool, is it allows me to actually scale the gradient inside this shape. Where it was by default was fine. It allows me to rotate it. What it also allows me to do is hover in here, and I can actually select a different center point. And I think this is going to work for if this is sort of a comet style thing with like a leading edge, right? It's kind of going to look kind of cool like that, I think, right? Because we're going to have motion going on. All right, so let's just go with that. Let's just try it out. I think I screwed up a little bit. Let me go to animation workflow here, workspace rather. And yeah, I think what I did is I actually moved one of these frames, which is fine. That's easily fixed. Let's fix that. I'm going to go and use the Align tool, which opened up in a completely different monitor. There we go. And I click here. Oh, align to stage. Click here and then there. And that just aligned it. Okay? All right, so here is our, whatever you want to call it, Comet. There's a couple of ways to do this, and here's the best way to do it. So we're going to create motion. We're going to finally actually create some animation. Again, we want this Comet to travel like this and get bigger. It's going to scale. It's going to do a bunch of things. We want it to follow a curve. The best way for this animation is, first of all, before we create animation, let's go to F8. I can... it's converting it to a symbol, right? If we don't want to do F8, again, if you're unfamiliar with any of this, you go to Modify, Convert to Symbol. Boom. And we can name it something. Let's just name it Comet for now. And I click OK. So now it's a symbol object. And you may have noticed my library panel now contains this object. It's a reusable symbol. It's something we can actually apply motion tweens to, which is what we want to do. Also the library, and what the library is, it's every single document in Animate, it has its own library. And what that does is it houses all of your imported assets and your symbols and whatever. If you imported bitmaps like you have in this case, there they all are, okay? And if you imported sound, you'll see sound files, you'll see everything. And you can, from here, drag multiple instances of symbols to the stage. They're all different, but they're all referencing this one symbol in the library, this one piece of artwork. If I went in and I can double click, and now I've entered this symbol again. I'm back to the actual vector artwork, that gradient we created, and you can see above your stage this edit bar, it's called, and it's really kind of like, I think of it like a breadcrumb trail. We're inside a comet, and so if I ever, I don't know, let's say I go and edit this gradient, watch what happens to the other instances. These are the instances that are back out on the stage timeline. They all update. I can show you a better, simpler example of that later on, but just so you're aware. I'm going to go back out to the stage, and let's delete the ones we don't need. I'm not deleting them from the library. It's still there. Okay, so now we want this to have its leading edge to be here. One thing I'm going to do first before I do anything else, just so it exists, I'm going to select the free transform tool. Okay. The free transform tool allows me to rotate stuff, you know, stretch and skew stuff like this, right? It's a great little tool. You use it a lot. Every time you select it, you'll see a little white dot. And what this is the center point for every symbol. If I move it, which I can, then everything is going to, all the properties for transforming this symbol are going to be based around this center point, okay? Stuff like that. It likes the center point. What I'm going to do is move the center point to the leading edge here. So that's its leading edge. So it's just going to hinge the right way for when I'm editing this. All right, so now this feels a little bit too big right now, so let's kind of scale it. Whoops, let's scale it to about here. And if we want, we can actually kind of squash it down a little bit. I'm going to turn off my snapping tool. Let's start off the screen. And again, we want this to travel like this and then kind of come around and bam, and hit here. Okay, and we're going to have it timed so that it gets to here right around this mark. I think this frame here we kind of don't want. Not yet anyway, I think, but we can change that later. So boom, and that's when it's going to happen. That's when the animation is going to happen. Okay. What does turning off strokes do? Turns off the color of the line. Yes. Thank you, Anna Jean. Now I finally understand the dot, but there's things I'll show you next to also understand about the dot too, so you can avoid headaches that'll happen eventually, that we've all learned the hard way, and I'll get to that in a minute. Max Powers Z-Way, hello, welcome. Glad you're here. Can you do my file yet? All right, patience, don't worry, I'll show you how to animate text. It's very simple. We'll do it after this, okay? All right, so let's get this done. So there's a couple of ways to do this because there's two different motion tweens. The way I'm going to do it is the new way, okay? Or it's not really so much the new way. I shouldn't call it the new way. That's misleading. It's the object-based way. There's a frame-oriented or a frame-based way of animating with motion tweens, and there's an object-based way of animating. And this is an object on the stage. I'm going to right-click over it, okay? My little stylus has a little right-click button. If you have a mouse, use the right-click. I right-click over it, and I say Create Motion Tween. And so now you'll notice in the timeline that this layer has a different color, all right? And it has a different iconography over here, and so it's a motion tween. And what this allows me to do, it's going to auto keyframe things for me. So if I position, I don't know, the frame indicator, which is this vertical red line in the timeline, and I move this somewhere, you'll notice that it created a keyframe for me automatically. And what it also did is it interpolated in between those two frames the position from point A to point B, what I just did, okay? So we have a very easy, quick way of making something move. So what's the difference between Animate and After Effects? Animate is a vector-based drawing and animation tool, whereas After Effects is more like Photoshop for video. It's bitmap/raster-based, and it's really made for doing special effects that you just can't get with vectors. It's just two different animals. You can integrate the two in terms of there's books on using Flash or Animate, I should say, and After Effects together, and usually that consists of creating animations inside of Animate and then exporting them with, say, a transparent background and bringing them into After Effects and applying effects to them. I've done a little bit of that before. It's very case specific as to what you're doing and why, but it can be done. But as far as similarities, there's very little overlap between the two, other than the fact that the only real overlap is that they both have timelines in it, and they both do essentially animation or time-based effects. But being vector, you know, it's just different. It's just very different. All right, so let's figure out the comet timing. Let me undo what I just did. All right, so what I want to do is, since we know we want the comet to end up here, let's say around the frame right before, I'm going to, right before the animation takes place that you already have, the bitmap animation, let's position the frame indicator at that point right there, that frame before, which is whatever, frame 53. And what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to literally move this to right here. Okay. It doesn't make sense right now, but it will. And I'm going to wait to scale it and stuff like that. Okay, so now we have an animation that does this. But what I want to do is change this path and edit it. So I'm going to grab the white arrow tool, sub-selection tool. Hold down, I think it's Alt. On Mac, it's Option, I think. But I hope it'll work on PC. Hold down Alt and click on one of the endpoints. Yep, I was right. And I can edit this path. See how I can do this? And I'm going to do the same for this path down here. And I'm going to try to create a path that's similar to the one you sort of have. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can make this a little bit easier. So now what should happen, in theory, is that it'll follow that path. Okay? Cool. So you get that idea. What I want to do at this point, too, is split this. I want this down here in the timeline. See how my span continues? I don't need it to continue. So what I can do, I can't just hit F7 and stuff like that like I normally could. It's in, say, a timeline or a layer that has, you know, basic keyframes. This is a different animal, so to speak. So what I have to do is I'm going to click down on the, I think on this frame here, and split the motion. Actually, no. I want to do it on the frame after. Right-click and say Split Motion. And then from here, I can right-click and say Remove this motion. And it allows me to then sort of delete it. So, boom. So we kind of got the basics down. So, but let's fine-tune it, because it's not exactly there yet. So what I'm going to try to do, I think this will work, right? Because we want this comet. Right now it's facing the wrong direction when it's making this turn. I think that the quick, easy way to do it is to select anywhere, one of the frames in this motion span. And if I say Orient to Path, it should orientate itself to the path because of that, the nature of how we edited that center point before we applied the motion tween. Okay. All right, and let's say the timing of this isn't exactly right. We pretty much have it down, but let's do something else. We can adjust the timing. I also want to adjust the scale. Let's make it actually go from, you know, a little bit bigger to smaller. So I'm going to do it manually. I'm just going to select the free transform tool or hit Q on the keyboard. I'm going to hold down the shift key to constrain the proportions. Let's make this kind of big. Okay, and let's go over here in the last frame. And let's make it kind of small. All right, so then let's zoom out and let's see what this looks like. All right, so you get the basic idea. Now, if you don't like the timing of it, let's say we want it to be a little quicker. Here's the cool thing about using this type of motion tween path. I can hover over one of these edges, right? I want to hover over the left edge. You see how my cursor changes to that double set of arrows? I'm going to just click and drag and stretch it down to the right. And now what that has done is it kind of has accordioned and compressed that timeline, right? If we took that to the extreme, it's going to be a lot faster. It's too fast, I think, but you could play with this after the fact. Something like around 10, I think, worked for me. So what we also could do is apply some easing as well. So again, I'm going to click anywhere on this this tween span, and there's an easing path. So I think, do we want it to ease in, or we want it to ease out because it's getting smaller, so it's like going off into the distance. So let's click and drag to the right, and that's easing out. If you click and drag to the left, that's easing in. Anywhere between 0 and 100, or 0 and minus 100. But let's go all the way to, I don't know, let's just see what all the way to 100 out looks like. It's a little too slow at the very end, so let's back it off to about 85 or something like that. We don't want it to come to a complete stop. So that's pretty good. I might take this whole thing here. I feel like I want to move it over 1. And maybe even have it so that it actually goes completely to here. Yeah, that looks a lot better. That works a lot better for me. So I don't know if that is sort of what you had in mind, Floofy. But that's how I would approach this. And you could probably do more to this. Let's actually do one other quick thing. Let's do something kind of fun. I don't know if it's going to show up, but right now the comet itself is 1 framed, right? But the one thing I just double clicked. Let me back up a little bit, right? One thing I didn't explain earlier is that every symbol has its own timeline. You can have any number of frames and layers in a timeline. So we have Comet as a library symbol, and here it is on the stage. We have a timeline over here, right? If I double click, watch what happens to my timeline. If I double click on the artwork that is this symbol, I double click it, and all of a sudden, where's my timeline? Where is it? Where is it? Oh, but it's back up 1, right? We've entered another timeline. We're inside the Comet timeline. It's a different timeline. I back up, go out to the scene 1 again, and there's all my animation. It's still there. But I double click to enter edit mode for this symbol. I have a whole new timeline. So let's take advantage of that. What if we did something fun where, let's say, since this is a shape, we can do a couple of different things. I'm going to do a shape tween. I haven't shown you guys shape tweens yet. And shape tweens are literally tweens that are applied to shapes. Let me save this and just give you a quick overview of using very, very simple shapes for shape tweening, right? So I'm going to grab, I don't know, a shape like this. Right? There's no object drawing mode. This is a raw vector shape like this right here. And I don't know, let's create a keyframe down the timeline. And if I do stuff like this, I can right click. Now, before I created a motion tween for the comet, I right clicked over the object itself and selected create motion tween. It's object-based. That motion tween I created had that path and all that. That's an object-based tween. I right-clicked over the object to select it. Here I'm working inside the timeline. So there's a timeline or frame-based tween, right? So if I right-click over the timeline, look at it's different. I can create a motion tween, but I don't want that because that gets I don't even know why that's an option here. It shouldn't even be an option here, right? I can create either a shape tween or a classic tween. I'm going to say shape tween. I'll get to classic tweens in a bit. And what that does, it actually does some weird stuff. It's kind of like a voodoo science with shape tweening because you're working with vectors, so it's really kind of bizarre how it works. There's really no rhyme or reason to it. It works better with simple shapes, and it can get a little bit out of control very quickly. But you can shape tween things, so there you go. Based on these points and where they are between one frame and the other, it does different things. It's kind of unpredictable. I never really use shape tweens. It depends. One thing shape tweens is really good for, let's say we want to change the color over time. Well, I just did that. I can select in a different keyframe a different color, which is kind of cool. If you wanted to, here's something really fun. Let's say you had a background. Let me change this. Let's make this a giant rectangle that covers, let's just say we're creating a background. And let's go to window. I want to make sure my colors are open. And of course it's on another monitor. We will find that right quick and do that. I'm going to go to linear gradient. And let's go with 2 colors, both opaque completely. And I'm going to say, let me create a sort of a daytime kind of yeah, let's go with, I don't know, something like this. And maybe more of like a white, yada yada. And then I'm going to fill it. Okay, with this gradient. I just use the bucket tool to fill it. Oh, but that's not what I want. I want to be able to edit that. So I'm going to grab the free gradient transform tool, or hit F on the keyboard, click inside that gradient, and I can edit this however I want. So let's create a nice little sky. And let's say you have whatever, pretty trees and stuff like that. Right? Remember, I'm in the first frame of this tween, so this is what's happening right now, but I don't want that. I'm going to copy. And in the last keyframe, I'm going to do a paste in place. Now, nothing's going to happen because they're identical from one frame to the other, or one keyframe to the other. I want to make this guy, feel like it's going to go from day to night. So now in the second keyframe, I'm going to click in here with this gradient transform tool. Okay, where did my color panel go? There you are. And let's go like really dark blue to like really something like that. I don't know, for lack of a better choice of colors. So now you could, over time, if let's just say you had an animation that required that, you could do like some sort of fake like time lapse of time. You can actually literally animate a gradient changing colors. And let's say, just for the sake of example, not only that, but you can edit, how the gradient works, how it changes using the transform tool, So look at that. And you can also take it to the next level, and you can be like, yeah, I'm going to just do stuff like this and make like a really psychedelic thing because I can, and create a shape tween. And so look at, I'm doing stuff like that, So you can get into really, really cool effects with shape tweens. Okay, fine. So I want to go to, what was I doing before? Supernova. So this is what I was going to do. So I'm going to, knowing what shape tweens can do. Keyframe in my file, delete the frames after the first frame. All right, I'll get to your file. All right. Can you edit the mid frames, not just the keyframes? Yes, you totally can. That's a great question. So I can go in here, select one of these frames, hit F6, or if you, again, just to show you guys, I think it's Insert Timeline Keyframe. It creates a keyframe, and now I can go in and edit it. So keyframes, yes, you can go in after the fact, after you created a motion tween. And let's change the colors real quick. Just horribly ugly colors, but it's a good example. So yeah. And so just because you have tweens in here doesn't mean, okay, now I'm just committed to that. No, you're not. You can even, let's say you wanted to speed up the distance between these two. You can't right-click an edge now. This isn't the same kind of tween as the motion tween we created with the Comet, where you can stretch it and, in either direction. These are frame-based animations, so they kind of like are stuck in terms of where they are, but they are and they aren't. What we can do, let's just say we want to kind of cut the length of this in half. You can kind of go in here anywhere and click and drag, select a range of frames, right-click over it, and then say remove frames. And it will. It removes those frames. Right-click over there, remove frames. That'll speed up the animation between the keyframes. Okay? Let's just say you want the opposite. All right, go in here, right? Select a range of frames. It's not, I'm not messing it up by doing it over, like having a keyframe in the middle of that highlight. And I hit F5. Hit F5 once, it will insert that many frames that's highlighted into that tween. Hit it again, hit it again, hit it again, as many times as you want. Same thing here. And make this like really slow. All right, so you're not married to whatever keyframes you set. You can always clear them, edit them, move them. If I want, I can just click that one, highlight it, right? And then click it again and drag it all the way down to here. And now that's going to be really quick, and then it's going to get slow. We can also select one of these tween spans, and in properties, you can apply easing in or out. So here I can, I don't know, ease this out as a color. And let's stretch this out just a little bit. And then on this side of the span, I'll ease in. So the color will slowly, gradually slow down to get to there, and then slowly, gradually start to increase before it goes out there. So anyway, there's lots of little things you can do. What I want to do here for this comet is create like a some sort of like flickering as it's moving. If I think it might work, it's what I want to see, but let's try it. What I'm going to do is go to like frame 10 for now, okay? And I'm going to hit F6. I'm creating my endpoint animation keyframe. I'm going to go back somewhere in the middle, create another keyframe, hit F6, and here I am going to actually grab the free transform tool. I don't know why. Oh, the center point, by the way, this is why I got confused for a second. The center point is back to the middle because we're at the beginning, we're at the actual artwork again. We're not at the symbol instance on the parent timeline where the edit center symbol point, this little white dot, is set here. But that's fine. What I'm going to do is, if I want to drag this, right, we're in the middle keyframe, I want to stretch this out, but I don't want it to stretch like it's doing now, both sides equal, right? I'm going to undo that. I'm going to hold down, I think on Windows it's Alt. I'm going to hold down Alt, yes, and it's going to now just stretch it out about that much. So now what I'm hoping will happen is, if I create a shape tween, it's going to stretch to there and then spring back again, shape tween. Okay, so we can play that. Now let's say I want to see, hey, I want that to play as a loop so I can get a better idea for it. There's a couple of ways to play your timelines as a loop. One is to go to Control and say Loop Playback, and that is a global document-wide command. It'll play every timeline and loop every timeline. But if I don't want that, and I just want to loop a timeline or a specific portion of a timeline, I'm going to click down here. Hopefully you guys can see it. I want to make sure you can see it. Let me just double check. It's down here at the bottom of our timeline panel, right? Right over the R and keyframer. The bunny is like right on top of it right now. All right, so click that, and it brings up these sort of handles or on either side. And what that allows me to do is check this out, this sort of throbbing comet of sorts. So I think it's a little bit too slow. I want it to be a little bit faster, like a flicker of a flame, let's say, on a candle. So I'm going to click and drag, select a couple of these frames, right-click over them, and say Remove. And do the same for the very first half of that animation. And let's try that again. It's better. So let's just see, before we do any more editing, let's just see what it looks like on the main timeline. So now what's happening is, if I click here, if I click on the actual symbol instance, I'm back out on the main timeline. Here's my animation. Here's the entire timeline. If I click here and look in the properties panel, right, I have this symbol selected. Because it's a graphic symbol, I have a looping section inside my properties panel. I have options. Okay, if you don't see it, it's probably not expanded. It's collapsed. Just click that little triangle to expand it. In options, right, I have looping. I also have play once. I also have single frame. We don't want play once. We want it to loop the whole duration. Set it to loop, first frame 1, that's fine. So what this is going to do now, it's a little hard to see, but it's going to actually kind of give it that sort of flickering motion as it's moving. So what's really happening? This timeline is moving this symbol along this path. Inside this symbol is another animation. So we're layering animations. In fact, what I want to do is remove more frames. I want it to really flicker. So let's, we don't even really need the tween. I want this to kind of flicker like this. And it might even be too much. Let's actually change it. Let's make it a little less flickery. Just fine tuning it. And if this doesn't work at all, that's fine too. But let's just try it. But I think it actually does work, right? Kind of gives it a pulsing. So what it's doing is it's actually moving this symbol object around, but inside the symbol is a whole other timeline. It only has 3 keyframes in it, but that's fine. And it's flickering, and it's moving a flickering movie. It's animating an animation. So that's what that is. So there you go. There you have it. Okay.